Fintech Chatter, brought to you by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. Welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where Fintech leaders join me for a chat. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and today's guest is Gabriel Le Roux, co-founder of Primer. As the world's first automation platform for payments and commerce, Primer offers merchants the underlying infrastructure they need to build better buying experiences for their customers. For the first time, merchants can connect and control their entire payment and commerce stack and build their ideal payment flows autonomously from scratch. It's like the Zapier of payments, where you can plug in any desired payment and commerce solution with one-click connections and zero code. I caught up with Gabriel on his recent visit to Australia to talk about their global expansion plans and why they see Australia and APAC as a huge growth market. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dexter. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you with us. Welcome to Australia. I'm sure many of our listeners probably may not have heard of Primer, so I thought it would be really good to get you to give us a little bit of a quick snapshot as to the business and the big problem that you solve.
Absolutely. So Primer is the world's first automation for payments and commerce. We're essentially enabling businesses to automate their payments and commerce stack. I started Primer after spending some time at Braintree and PayPal myself. I was there for about 5 years. The one thing that we realized is that all businesses want to use a multitude of services in order to optimize the way they're running their business. Those can be payment service providers, fraud providers, local payment methods, wallets, but also email services, communication services, pretty much anything you will consume throughout the lifecycle of a payments, or simply tools and solutions that you will use to run your business. And what we've seen with my co-founder Paul, who was also at Braintree and PayPal, is how complex the integration of these services can become. Right? So you end up with an extremely fragmented ecosystem of solution that you have to connect together. And fundamentally, the one thing that was lacking was the underlying infrastructure to support all that.
Yeah.
So we've seen that firsthand. I was in the US, in the UK, Paul was in the UK as well, in the room with all these businesses, and we thought, well, there's something that needs to be done here, right? The model of the PSP isn't solving for that complexity. There is a need for an underlying payments and commerce infrastructure, and that's what Primer is essentially doing.
Cool. So obviously there's been, kind of big push, and I think finally a realization and recognition in financial services that APIs exist. We've seen therefore the kind of move into open banking in the UK and here in Australia with CDR. Where does Primer play within that space?
There is absolutely a lot of things which are quite interesting happening right now in Australia with open banking and the proliferation of wallets. Just to take a step back, I think the principle that we're looking to solve at Primer is the notion that there is only going to be more and more and more services you want to use across your commerce stack and payment stack, right? And that's something that is become very clear to us, and I think to all businesses out there. If you want to use payment as a lever for growth, if you want to differentiate yourself, you have to use a multitude of services. Fundamentally, the issues that arises when you have to do that is how you're going to be doing it, right?
Yeah.
You're going to end up with an extremely long roadmap, a technical roadmap that you're going to have to complete over a certain period of time. And what we see is most of the time that roadmap is going to be 12 to 24 months long. You need to allocate a tremendous amount of resource to add these services, to make them work together, to create a cohesive experience, to have a beautiful checkout. And so that's essentially what Primer is solving. So if we're looking at open banking, I think it's been obviously something extremely interesting. I'm coming from the UK. We've seen a lot of services being launched in the UK, account-to-account payments, is actually gaining traction. In Australia, there's certainly like, a lot of things going on with the NPP supporting like more innovation in the payment space, faster, flexible, data-rich transaction, with like Pay ID or Pay 2 driving the adoption of NPP. And these are certainly some innovation that merchants want to use in order to provide like, I would say a more seamless experience to the end user that we can facilitate, right?
Yeah.
The notion of saying, hey, now you have this infrastructure, you have this this automation platform that allows you to quickly launch these services, to present them in the right way to the end user, while ensuring that from a technical standpoint, things can be maintained in a very simple way, is what we're providing to the market. So really the what's interesting with Primer is that we're helping the merchant, right, with the adoption and usage of these services. We're also helping the ecosystem. Because the moment Primer is integrated, if you want to use any of these services, if you want to use a wallet, if you want to optimize the way certain things are presented on the checkout, you don't have to go and talk to the engineers. You can actually do that literally from the dashboard, create a workflow, design your checkout without touching a single line of code, which is a major innovation in the industry.
Yeah. One of the big issues facing merchants here in Australia, Gabriel, is least cost routing. And it's so complex. It can be extremely costly given the environment that we're in, where everybody's super cost conscious. I can't help but think that that's got to be a great way in which business like Primer can help merchants.
100%. So I think the RBA announcement that least cost routing is expected to be developed for mobile wallet transaction is a massive opportunity for businesses to capture payment at a lower cost. In itself, like this is again like something that businesses want to do, and how they're going to do that. This is the big question mark, right? So the automation platform that we have, the workflow engine that we have, like allows for this to happen in a very seamless way. Again, like it goes back to the notion that you're going to have things that users want to have, right? Those wallets. You're going to have things that businesses want to do from a cost optimization or even from a regulatory standpoint. And these are things that we can facilitate at Primer. It goes back to the notion that this is going to be part of a roadmap. How are you going to do that? When are you going to do it? We are here to accelerate all that by providing like all the tools and services that these payments team can use in order to achieve all these things. Certainly something that we can help businesses in Australia achieve in a very simple way.
So, Stripe built the whole business model around becoming friends with the engineers. You're bypassing that and becoming friends with the founders who don't need the engineers.
Actually, it's a good question. We are friends with the engineers as well. Primer is it's a technical product that has been built out of very crisp technical insights that we got while we were working at Braintree and PayPal and now as well. 60% of the company are in like engineers and product managers and product people. What we're saying is, hey, like you only have to learn payment once. You can concentrate on like your core business. Primer is going to take care of like your commerce and payment stack, right? And that's something that I should say has been can be seen when looking at the way we've designed the product and designed the API. Our docs are public. We are working extremely closely with engineers and developers. We have like a team dedicated to developer experience. But the principle that we're saying here is like we want to accelerate the adoption of these services. Yeah. We want to ensure that payments and commerce can be managed like easily through our workflow and universal checkout. And for that, you need a unified infrastructure and you need a way to sort of like connect all these services together. Yeah.
So here in Australia, CDR, it's the consumer data, right? But what we've not seen as yet has been that kind of transfer into products or services that consumers want to use or can use. You make a really good reference there around Pay 2, where this technology has been in play for at least 2-3 years, and it still hasn't got the kind of traction there.
I think it takes some time for consumer to understand how like they can use like certain services. There is a level of education, right? Like, hey, why should I use that? Like what it is. Like I think we like, us working some time in tech, we take things for granted, but people need to understand like the benefits of these services. The reality is, I think in Australia and also in the UK, we see like an increase in wallet usage, right? We see like Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal are like obviously like gaining adoption, and it's even more so the case here with Buy Now Pay Later, which has been like widely used. I think there is like some studies that says that wallet or like payment through wallets will become the majority of payments by 2025. So it's there's a learning curve, but I think it's just a matter of time, right? If you're looking at the UK, account-to-account payments is taking some time, and it's also like vertical specific. Some industries you will have like a lot more usage, some will take a bit longer, and I think it's also why it may also like not be widely used is probably like there is fundamentally an issue like or like challenges to get these products live and ready and used. And this is also like what we're here to solve. So the enablement or the activation and the notion of launching those services is widely simplified when using Primer. So we could eventually contribute to like higher adoption in the long term.
And if we can talk about some of your customers, has there been a specific type of customer that you've gone after that you feel you're best able to support?
It's a good question. So Primer, as an infrastructure for payments and commerce, we're pretty much like vertical agnostic. So we are solving like one of the biggest complexity in payments without being a payments company, right? So we don't have to be financially regulated. We are what we call PCI, a level 1 compliant, which means that we can hold and store like raw card data. So there is a level of compliance that we need to follow every year. But from our perspective, we could work with anyone, anywhere, right? And that's also why we're like fully global. So we have a team, a sales team in the UK and EU. We have a sales team in the US. We have a sales team in APAC, in Singapore, here in Sydney. And we've seen like adoption of our product across like a multitude of vertical: travel, ticketing, e-com, grocery, mobility. If you think about it, like in each of these verticals, like you have to make sure that you're gonna have a consistent, fully optimized like checkout experience. In some of these verticals are highly saturated, so payments become a differentiator. Hey, I have like this payment method. I have the ability to create like subscription, like all these things. But you also need to ensure that, in the background, like you have all these services that will make sure that your business is run in the most efficient way. Like, hey, Dexter can't pay right now. Like, what do you do? Or maybe you send a Slack message to your customer success team to let them know using Slack, or you create a Zendesk ticket. All these things can be managed with Primer. So it's quite a unique position to be in. This, global exposure, working across vertical, it's been very exciting. Like since we started Primer to see like the sort of like problem and challenges that we can solve.
Cool. I want to talk about the kind of origins of Primer in a moment, but I want to touch on what you've just said there, because common wisdom, and I'm sure everybody that you've probably gone to for advice, before you started Primer, would have said, focus on a niche and do one thing. right? And so you talk about the payments value chain. We've got people who've focused on checkout and just log in at checkout and a fast checkout. We've got others who focused on another part of the value chain. You're focusing on a massive problem that has lots of components and global.
Yeah. How
did you kind of start with, what is the one thing that we start with on day one?
Well, I think it goes back to like what we saw when we were in the room with these large businesses at Braintree and PayPal, right?
Yeah.
You have like all the things I described here. The enablement of services, the creation of like these payments and commerce workflows, the like unifying your checkout across platform. But fundamentally, the one thing that was lacking is, the notion that merchants need an infrastructure, a payments and commerce infrastructure to support all these use cases.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we're solving. I think there is essentially like a couple of value drivers that we are like sharing with our customer when they're thinking, okay, what can I do with Primer, right? There is that first one, which is like you can optimize for payment success. You can orchestrate your payment stack. You can unify your fraud. That's the sort of like payment angle, right? You have the second part, which is operational efficiency. There's a lot of things you want to do when you're growing your business. Maybe like optimizing the way like you're going to communicate with like different team like internally at your company when an event is happening. The example I just gave you, a payment is being declined. We know Dexter is a power user. He's been buying on the website or the mobile app for many years. Let's do something, right?
Yeah.
And that's typically like can be quite complex, but with Primer you can define these workflows. So like this is one example when talking about operational efficiency. And then you have like the notion of like increasing the stickiness.
Yeah.
Especially right now, I think a lot of businesses are thinking, hey, okay, I have a great product, but I want to make sure that I reward my loyal customer, right? I want them to feel valued. I want to make sure that they like my product, they like the experience. And in order to do that, you again need to consume a lot of services that maybe trigger when a payment is happening, right? Receiving an email with a coupon code, or sending a gift card, like if you buy 5 T-shirts on a website. Like these things, are extremely important for online businesses.
So to an extent, a lot of businesses have outsourced that by using buy now, pay later partners.
Exactly, and we are connecting to them. So again, you see like you have all these things, but it goes back to one fundamental thing, which is, hey, how do you actually go live, use, and connect all these services together, right? And so if you're thinking of like the sort of payments and commerce value chain, it's a suite of events for which you need to use a lot of services.
Yeah.
Right? And that's essentially what we're solving. So going to your first question is, hey, you have all these things that you're doing and that you're facilitating. Yes, right? We are doing all these things, but the problem that we're solving is the lack of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what we're providing. Essentially, the moment you have Primer integrated and the moment you start using Primer, you can just run your business in a much more efficient way. Accelerate market expansion, provide a beautiful experience on the checkout, facilitate internal processes, and so on and so forth.
So would this be a correct kind of analogy? It's almost like an Airtable for an e-commerce business.
Could be, or like Zapier for commerce and payments. It's a good analogy.
Cool. So let's talk about the kind of origins of Primer.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, PayPal, Braintree. What was the point that you thought, right, I now want to go and do this myself? What was the catalyst for that?
It was. I think I joined PayPal, Braintree. So I was at Braintree, which is part of like the PayPal group, right? It's a PSP that got acquired by PayPal. I joined in 2015 in the UK, and I think working with businesses across the globe, looking at how they were thinking about payment, designing their payment stack, thinking about their commerce journey, and working with global businesses, right? I was in the UK and then I moved to the US. I was working with businesses in Europe, of course, but also in Asia. I sort of realized with my co-founder that these online businesses want to actually create those unique experiences, but they had no product to do this. And, we were doing whiteboarding sessions. We were spending a lot of time with them. They were investing a lot of resources. And there's amazing...
Sorry to interrupt, but it's almost like it kind of, the huge gap and gulf between a McKinsey coming in and telling the exec team, this is the strategy, and then, well, how do you tactically
exactly
execute on that?
That's exactly that. So you have all these things you want to do, and then it becomes extremely complex from a technical standpoint. You're thinking, okay, sure, I'm going to do it, but how, right? And so for us, it was like, oh, okay, well, there is fundamentally something lacking here, right? We need to create something, and at this point, you have that sort of fire, and you're thinking, well, let's do it, right? And we've done hundreds of interviews. So we left, the Braintree and PayPal, and then we thought, hey, let's actually start fresh and do all these interviews to understand, again, what are the challenges that these teams are having when thinking about their payments and commerce stack, and that's essentially how we built Primer. So Primer has been built out of very crisp product and technical insight, and interviews that we've done with many businesses across the globe. And now it's fascinating to see how the teams we used to, or the people we used to talk to back then, it are using the Primer product. It's as if they had Primer all their life. They just log in and start creating those workflow, design their checkout. It's very natural. And you know why? Because those are the things they were doing on a whiteboard. But now they have a product that they can use to achieve that vision.
What I'm going to make a distinction here, right? Because what you're talking about is actually very rare. It's done a lot, right? And I think every business goes and takes a similar path of research and defining what the problem is, and even goes out and asks customers those questions as well. But oftentimes, certainly, and I've experienced this in even my own business, what a customer tells you what they want isn't often what they need. How did you make that distinction between, we're interviewing hundreds of people, what's the stuff that kind of they actually need versus what they're telling us they want that we'll build and then they'll
But that's why you need to have the sample needs to be big enough, right? If you're actually doing all these interviews, there are things which are going to be pretty much business specific, right? And then you're going to start seeing some trends, some patterns. I think the pattern here was we want to accelerate the integration of services, or we want to make sure that we are providing the right payment method at the checkout. We want to unify our fraud. We want to ensure that things like 3D Secure is easily manageable, with for certain payments. We want to make sure that from a data consumption things are optimized. So you start identifying those trends and challenges, and that's how you're designing and defining how the product should be built. So it's a function of the number, I think, of interviews you're making sure as well that you got to talk to a diverse sample of customer, and not over-indexing on a vertical or an industry. And when you have all those data points, then you can you can identify those trends and build a product that matters.
Now, I want to talk about kind of Primer as a business and where you're at right now. It's obviously been a really difficult 12 months from a startup fintech funding perspective. When did you actually launch Primer?
So we started Primer in early 2020.
Right.
Yeah.
So you kind of had the COVID boom and everybody went crazy, and funding was I'm assuming people were kind of falling over to give you money, and now it's a very different kind of I guess landscape. What's been the experience that you've had over this last 3 years, and kind of how do you contrast that first year and a half to this kind of second year and a half?
Yeah. So we started Primer like in early 2020. The one thing that is quite unique about Primer is we're fully remote. So we were remote first organization. That's not because of COVID. We actually started as a remote company. A couple of reasons for that. One, we wanted to have access to the biggest pool of talent possible. We know that there is like very good people everywhere, and we wanted to make sure that we could, have them join Primer. So we employ in more than 35 countries today. And also by the nature of being remote means that you have a lot of local expertise. You can provide extremely reliable support to your customer when they're live, and so on and so forth. So the COVID situation and the fact that everyone was trying to optimize the ways of working for Primer, we were lucky enough that we started the company as fully remote, and so that was we could continue to run the business in the most efficient way with that structure. I think there's throughout COVID we've certainly seen the willingness for online businesses to digitalize their experience and to rethink the way what should I do now? Should I if I want to attract businesses customer, how can I make sure that the experience I'm going to providing is going to be best in class, especially when that if you're looking at I think in Australia or more widely, if you think about it, card abandonment rate is a massive issue, right? I think there is between 67 or 69% of customer which will leave a checkout if they don't see their favorite payment method, which is crazy if you think about it, right? So we've been able to help these businesses transition to the online world from a and from a funding perspective, we've raised with very good funds, Accel, Boulderton, Iconic in the UK, Iconic is in the US, and they've been supporting us throughout the Primer journey. And I think right now the market is a bit different. But Primer is extremely well funded, and we have very strong investors supporting us.
Cool. So we're kind of, I guess, pretty much everybody in my network found us, up until about a year ago, was told growth at all costs, and then it was kind of cut costs at all costs, and kind of really get to profitability as quickly as possible. Do you have that type of pressure, or are you still in the kind of phase where they see that this is a global opportunity and it's something that maybe is kind of, you can justify, the additional time, support, and, because of the scale of the opportunity?
Well, I think we are solving a global issue, but we also have an extremely efficient way of running the business and making sure that it's a viable business. So from that perspective, we continue to grow. We're continuing to invest in product engineering. We're continuing to get more users on the Primer platform, while ensuring that from a monetization standpoint, things are being done in an efficient way.
And with respect to, I guess, the kind of global expansion plans, you're here obviously in Australia because you're sitting with me. What is it that's got you excited about Australia?
Well, I think again, I think there has been definitely I would call them almost structural changes, like the NPP and the sort of adoption of wallets in Australia. You look at APAC as a region as well. There is the opportunity here is massive, right? You have cashless payments, which are going to increasing I guess globally, cashless payment will be 80% of payment by 2025. You have wallets in APAC, which are going to count to 72% of payment by 2025.
Yeah, I read something the other day that it was, I think, 60% already.
Well, it's around 68%, 60 something percent right now. So if you think about it, that means that, hey, as a business, you need to ensure that you can have all these services ready. You need to ensure that you're going to provide a a seamless experience to your user. But there's also like another thing here in the region is how I was in Bangkok, I was in KL, I was like last week. You have a lot of local preferences, like the behavior online is going to be widely different, right? But if you're a business in APAC, you need to ensure that you can adapt to all these differences, right? That means that you need to optimize the processes internally on how you're handling eventually regulation or data consumption, all these things, while providing that experience.
You were in Singapore recently. You go to a shop, there's like 7 different payment terminals.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you translate that online, it's the same thing. Pay now, pay la, and all that. So, and you also have that notion that you have like the underbanked and the unbanked, for which you also need to provide like ways of paying. So for us, this is why like APAC is interesting. A bit similar to Europe, if you think about it, it's a very fragmented market with local preferences, with regulation, which means that it can become like a bit complex for businesses to optimize the way they're going to be expanding in those markets, and that's essentially what we're solving.
Cool. Now, a lot of businesses that do come in and launch in ours, and I've helped a lot of them, like Revolut, TrueLayer, and 10x, and many others. Oftentimes they see Australia as this kind of launch pad for innovation, a place where you can come and test new products in a kind of similar regulatory environment with similar kind of guardrails in place. And if it goes wrong, it's kind of not as disastrous as if you go live in the US and it doesn't work out. Are there kind of any other kind of views that you've got on Australia as a market, particularly around payments, that you think, hey, there's some kind of interest here around potential innovation or products that we could launch that maybe we wouldn't launch elsewhere?
I think the way we're going to be looking at this is how we're working with our businesses, right? We want to have a very efficient feedback loop with our customer, listening to what they want to do, how they want to do it. Sort of that dictates also like the services that we add onto Primer. So right now, if you log into the Primer dashboard, you're going to see more than 100 services across payments and commerce, right? PSPs for provider, wallets, communication services, like shipping and logistic tools, and so I'm sure that in the coming months, years, there's going to be a lot of these services which are going to be very much Australia specific that will add, which will sort of be used in a very specific way by Australian businesses. So I think it's a function of time, right? As we start working with more and more businesses here, I'm sure we'll launch product and services which are going to be very much region specific. So that's certainly things that we're going to be doing.
And I guess from a kind of news and announcement perspective, what does the rest of 2023 have in store for Primer?
Well, there's a lot of things going on. Product-wise, we are obviously we always want to innovate, and we want to continue to bring innovation to our customer. We recently announced a product called Observability, which is essentially a product that enables merchants to have a unified view of all their payment data within one single interface, where they're going to get very, very crisp insight on how they should be running their payment stack. The performance of their payments, the split by region, the authorization rate, the performance of 3D Secure. When we were doing those interviews, the one thing that came up quite a lot is, hey, I don't understand, my data. I don't understand the performance of my payments. It's a black box. Primer as an infrastructure want to solve that. And this product really provides a very simple way of understanding, what's going on here, right? And then, when you're looking at that data, then you can dictate. It helps you define how you're going to be creating those workflows. So that's something that we've announced quite recently. It can be used as a standalone. So if you just want to push data to that product and have this dashboard to look at the performance of your stack, you can use it as well as a standalone product. But again, like, you know, we are expanding here. We're working with our customers. So there's a lot more things that we're going to be announcing in the coming weeks. And we've announced a few customers recently. One championship, which is an exciting one. It's the equivalent of the UFC, but in APAC. So they've been working with us. Pace in the buy now pay later as well was announced recently. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on.
Awesome. Now, one of the really cool kind of byproducts of me doing this podcast for a few years is the feedback that I get from people, to the insights that they get from listening to guests like yourself. And so what I've kind of started asking guests is, you know, which podcasts you listen to and any recommendations that you might have.
Been a bit busy lately, so I've been haven't had a chance to listen to too many podcasts. In the UK, you have like 11FS, which is quite big, very good podcast. So that's the one I've been listening the most. So yeah, that would be the one.
Cool. Yeah. Now the other cool thing about the podcast is the people who listen to it, right? Some of the most talented people not only in Australia, but I think we're listened to in 40 countries actually. So if you are listening, I'm talking to you. But we've got great talent listening to this. We've got founders who are listening, who could be potential partners. Mm-hmm. What's the best way for people to reach out to you, Gabriel, if they're interested in what Primer do and think that it could be either one, it could be, you know, potentially an employee, or two, potential partner for you?
Well, first of all, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, right? I'm sure there's going to be my name somewhere.
In the show notes, link in the show notes.
Exactly, folks. Right? So feel free to reach out, add me on LinkedIn. Always happy to have a chat, discuss, you know, payments, commerce, you know, startup, tech, you know, in general. Please go on primer.io if you want to see how the product works, the case studies from our customer. And yeah, we're attending a lot of events. So I'm sure I'll see like some of the listener in real life at some point as well.
Great. Well, Gabriel, it's been fantastic to chat with you. Thanks so much for sharing the Primer story with us. And look, good luck here down under as well. I'm sure you'll find that there's, you know, a lot of cool kind of, not only just cool people, but look, it's a place where I think we're really keen to invite you know, other businesses and other countries into the region, because we see the importance of, you know, how that adds to innovation.
100%. We're here to innovate. We're here to help businesses accelerate their payment strategy and the way they're managing their commerce infrastructure. We're also here to help the industry. Like, you know, we want to be the biggest enabler in commerce, right? Mm-hmm. So with Primer, let's also like make sure that all these services which are being launched, all these like founders which are creating like unique ways of you know, accepting payments or running their, you know, or API solutions, like we want to make sure they have a platform they can use to sort of, you know, launch their product. We can do that at Primer. Yeah. So it's been great to be on the podcast. It's amazing to be here in Australia. Again, if you want to reach out, add me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. And you can connect with me, folks, on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us. If you're new to the show, make sure to give us a follow and a subscribe. And if you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. Until the next episode, keep safe. Fintech Chatter is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you find world-class fintech leadership talent to build world-class fintech ventures. And you can find out more at tier1people.com.